Olympus has launched two products today, Olympus OMD EM10 Mark IV and a new lens M.Zuiko 100mm to 400mm f5.0-6.3 zoom lens. And this video is my first impression of the 100 to 400mm zoom lens. Hi there, my name is Peter Forsgaard, an Olympus visionary and a professional photographer from Helsinki, Finland. And before we start, consider subscribing to my channel and hit that bell so you get notified when there is a new video online. My channel is all about you getting to be a better photographer and also about Olympus gear. But let's start talk about the lens. Unfortunately, I don't have the lens with me anymore. I got it in the beginning of July for a few days to test, and I had to bring it back because it's such a popular lens and people really wanted to test it beforehand. Thanks Olympus for letting me test this really much weighted lens beforehand. And yeah, this lens has been, how do you say it? Let's say that there is a similar lens from a competitor, and I know a lot of people has been interested in that lens, and really glad that Olympus finally made this lens because it's been people have been waiting it for many years, and it's finally here, and let's see how it performs. This lens is the longest lens that Olympus has at the moment. The 400mm is the longest focal length that you can get from M.Zuiko lenses, until the 150 to 400mm f4 Pro lens is available by the end of the year. But for now, this is the longest lens. The fastest aperture at 100mm is 5.0 and at 400mm is 6.3. So it's not the fastest lens, but I think it's fast enough because we have to remember that when you're using really long telephoto lenses, the depth of field is quite narrow and usually you stop down anyway. So having a 5.0 100mm to 6.3 400mm, it's not actually really that bad. And the focal length range is really great because now Olympus can only offer to 40 to 150mm. Of course, you can use the extender with that and make it a bit longer. And then you have the fixed focal length lens 300mm f4. And especially for me, who is not really used to using really long telephoto lenses, a zoom is a lot more versatile. You don't have to use your feet as a zoom that much because sometimes it's not even possible. You're stuck in a place. Let's say that you're doing bird photography. In many cases you're stuck in one place. So having a zoom makes it a lot easier. And here are the other specs of this lens. As you saw from the specs, the lens is weather sealed, and that is very good because no worries if there is a bad weather when you're out there shooting birds or wildlife or sports or whatnot. Because in bad weather you usually can get really interesting images because they're more rare. People usually photograph when it's a nice weather and don't do photography in a bad weather, but bad weather can give you some really good images, and that's why it's really good thing that the lens is weather sealed. That's a really important thing. Another good thing is that the lens is compatible with MC14 and MC20 converters. And I tested it with the MC14 and I will show you pictures later. But unfortunately I didn't have the MC20 at the moment, so I cannot test it with that. But there are some indications about the quality with that also when I used the MC14. But that's a good thing that it's compatible with the extenders because it can make the lens a lot longer, and that's a good thing. All these focal lengths, all these really long focal lengths, you can use handheld, or you can use the whole system handheld because the lens has stabilizer. It's 3 stops, and you can turn it off from the lens, and then it will use the IBIS from the camera. So you can choose which one you use. But this lens is not Sync IS, so the thing is that if you have the stabilizer on both on your camera and your lens, it will use the one that is more efficient. And then if you turn it off from the lens, it will use the body's image stabilizer, and if you turn it off from the body, it will use only the lens stabilizer. And the reason that long lenses tend to have a stabilizer in the lens, even though you have a very good stabilizer in the body, on long lenses the stabilizer on the lens works better. So that's something to consider and see how it works. But it's not a Sync IS, which it could have been, but maybe the size of the lens can be smaller without the Sync IS. I'm not really sure why they made that decision, but I didn't have any problem using even with the MC14 and 400mm handheld, so it's not a problem. The stabilizer is effective enough, but as I said, Sync IS would have been nice. Let's look at the images that I took with the 100 to 400mm f5.0-6.3, and then after that let's talk about the AF and the image quality. And as you saw, nothing wrong with the image quality, and there is no big drop using 400mm. Like sometimes there are in zooms that it's not at its best when it's really at its longest focal length, but there is no big image quality loss. And the as I said, the build quality, the look and feel, the weather sealing, the image stabilizer, everything that says that it's a pro lens, even though it's not considered a pro lens in Olympus lens lineup. And I would say that the image quality is also top notch. It's really good image quality, at least good enough for me. I didn't see any, had any problems with the image quality. The AF is quite fast, but to be honest, when I was at the same place at the Helsinki's, the Helsinki Senate Square, and in downtown Helsinki photographing birds, I got a bit more keepers with the 300mm, so that has a bit better and faster AF. But it's not slow, but you need to be a bit more experienced to nail the focus on this. I'm not saying that it's slow, but it's not as fast as the 300mm or the 40 to 150mm. And when you're using the MC14, I had a bit of trouble getting flying birds sharp. As I said, I'm not really experienced, so finding the bird with the long lens on the sky was also a bit of a hard thing for me. And if that is for you, then you might want to check out the EE1 dot sight viewfinder that you can put on top of your camera. I have a video about it over here, so that could help. But I forgot to bring it when I was photographing with the long lens, so I didn't use it. But as I said, it's very good, and the reason that I went to and made images of birds is because that's the most likely use that people will use that lens. And as I said, I also used it with the MC14, and the image quality doesn't go worse when you're using that. Of course, there is a slight difference, but not as much. But as I said, the AF is a bit slower, so that's a bit of a downside, but it's still usable. I'm not saying that you cannot use it. The closest focusing distance is 1.3 meters, and that's really good. I need 1.3 meters with the whole range of the focal length. So at 400mm and with the extender, it's 1.3 meters. That is really close, and it's a good thing that you can, with those long lenses, you can focus really close, because those are really good for small macros. You take images of butterflies and such, and you can be a bit further away with the longer lens and still get a so-called close-up. It's almost a macro lens, and that's good. If you're photographing birds and you don't really see any birds, you can start taking images of flowers on when you're wandering around in woods and looking for birds or other wildlife. And that's a good thing. It makes the lens more usable and more versatile when you have a close focusing distance. And as I said, it's also with 400mm. It's 1.3. That's another good thing. And to help the close-up AF, there is a switch on the side of the lens where you can choose the focal, or it's kind of like a focal limiter, from 1 meter to 6 meters. Then you have 1.3 meters to infinity, and then from 6 meters to infinity. And that will make the AF a bit faster. So if you photograph flying birds, you can set this to 6 meters to infinity, so that it will be even faster. So it doesn't even think about focusing closer than that, and that's a good thing. If there is something in the viewfinder, you know, you have something closer and then you have something in the back, it won't, the stuff that in front doesn't affect the AF, it will stay in the back, and that's a good thing. It makes more keepers with that. And then when you focusing really close, then you can switch it to 1.3 to 6 meters. Yeah, it's a good feature. And then there is also one locking switch where you can lock the zoom so that it will stay at 100 millimeters. You can use it on other focal lengths, but that's just to prevent the lens, you know, doesn't start, what do you call it? Doesn't start to zoom by itself when you're holding it. So what do you think? What has been the most interesting feature, or is the whole lens really exciting for you? Please let me know in the comments down below. And then the conclusion. As I said, this lens is really well made. The look and feel is really good. It's quite small, easy to carry around. This feels like a pro lens, even though it's not considered a pro lens in Olympus lens lineup. And also the focal length is really good, from 100 to 400 millimeter. It's really versatile, and you don't need to use prime lenses, because sometimes zoom is better. You don't always have the possibility to use your feet as a zoom. Especially, you know, sports, you might be in a certain spot, or bird photography, you might be stuck in one place. You cannot really move, because if you start moving, the birds fly away and stuff like that. But when zooming in, it helps you and might get you some better images. And yeah, so talking about the fastest aperture, it's not the fastest lens, but it's a compromise to have f5.0, and then you can still keep the lens reasonably sized, so it's not too heavy and too big, but it's still, you know, fast enough anyways. And then of course the closest focusing distance, 1.3 meter, is a really good thing, and it makes the lens even more usable and versatile. What you have heard now from this first impression, are you planning on getting this lens? Please let me know in the comments down below. And what about me? Am I getting the lens? I've said many times before in my videos that I'm not really a user of long lenses. I don't really need them, because the only reason I've been starting to shoot birds is because I want to, you know, share my experience to you and test lenses, because that's most likely the subject that you're using it. But to be honest, this lens is really interesting, and because of the focal length range. And now the longest lens that I have now is the 40 to 150 millimeter with the MC14 extender. And as I said, very seldom need really long lenses. And what makes it even more desirable is the price. It's only 1,300, or a little under 1,300 euros / dollars. And that's a good price for the money, because comparing to the competitor's price, this one is really nicely priced. And I'm really glad that Olympus did not overprice this lens, because I was a bit afraid that it will be really expensive. With this price, it's really good value for money. And here is the video about the new camera that Olympus launched today. Olympus OMD EM10 Mark IV. You might want to watch that, because it's an interesting camera. But hey, thanks for watching, and bye for now.